What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show, and today we're going to have another little unscripted conversation where I'm going to answer a question that I got a handful of times in the comment section of my Royal Enfield review, and that's, do I actually like Royal Enfield motorcycles? We're going to take this Himalayan out here for a quick little ride, and we're going to talk about why I enjoy Royal Enfield, why I think you should give them a second chance, and why I think they're actually really good for the motorcycling industry. Let's go.
So let me start out this video here by explaining a little bit why I have this interesting relationship with Royal Enfield. So, as many of y'all know, back in a former life, I used to work Amminoob, and we had kind of a running joke that Royal Enfield was the one of the worst brands out there, and that, you know, they're the slowest and they're the derpiest and they're the worst bikes, blah blah blah. And for the longest time, they were a real whipping boy on the channel. I think, looking back on that, that we may have made a bit of a mistake by just dogging on Royal Enfield so hard, because a lot of the things that we say have an impact, and I think we may have negatively affected people's general perception of Royal Enfield. That their bikes are slow and worthless and you don't want to get one and blah blah blah. And you know, it was only when we started riding the Royal Enfields that we started understanding. We were looking at it, and myself included, we were looking at Royal Enfield as a spec sheet warrior. We were looking at the numbers and we were like, why would you get this when you could get something else with more power and blah blah blah. You know, it's the 650s, the Royal Enfield 650s, the spec sheet, you look at them, they're making 47 horsepower. And an Ninja 400 makes 47 horsepower. So why would you get the Royal Enfield if they're the same price and you could get more power from a Japanese brand? So from that sense, I understand why people tend to look at things like that. However, we got a chance to ride a fan's it was the Continental. It was the one with the clip-ons. It was the Continental GT 650, and I really liked that bike. I really liked it. It had this Sportster-esque quality about it, where it had just this velvety rumble to the engine, and it had this classic feel to it, and it didn't have any like plastic on it. It felt like a fully built, fully realized motorcycle, not something cheap and just thrown together. And did it have its problems? Yeah, absolutely it had its problems. But I left that review being like, well, there's something here. There's something real about these motorcycles. I'm starting to understand it. And that really opened my mind up to the idea of spending more time on Royal Enfields. Sometimes you got to give it the beans to get it up a hill. This one's not exactly fast. And then we got, for a giveaway, the Interceptor 650, the one with the handlebars. And I spent so much time on that bike, and I really started to fall in love with it, honestly, to the point where, you know, we were talking about doing these builds on this bike, and, you know, oh, what do you think we could get this bike to do? And then I sat down and thought about it, and I was like, that's exactly why I love the Sportster. It's exactly why I love the Sportster, because you can come to that motorcycle and be like, you know, it's a fine cruiser, but I could turn this thing into an ADV bike. Or I could turn it into a flat track racer, or I could turn it into a long way round kind of tourer, you know, something where I could just ride over the horizon and back. You know, it's one of those motorcycles where the bones are fine, and there's an aftermarket that supports all of this fun modding. And I started to realize that that's exactly what I was experiencing with the Royal Enfield. It had this playful quality about it, but it's also a bike that has A, factory support for mods, and B, has a bunch of people in the aftermarket doing some really cool stuff with it. So it was really then that it all started to click for me, and I started reading up on the stuff that Royal Enfield as a company was doing. And I fell down the rabbit hole of checking out the Build Train Race program. For those of you guys who are unaware, BTR is where they take riders who aren't professional racers, and they build, train, and then race motorcycles. They start on, I believe, a factory 650, and then they get some support from S&S and a couple of other parts manufacturers, and they build these motorcycles and then they race them. That's so cool. And there's, like, if you go online and look at the Himalayan page, there's the slide school. You can go check out the slide school where you're riding, I think it's probably Scrams now, but back in the day when I saw it, it was Himalayans. And you go learn how to do flat track style riding on a Himalayan. The stuff that I'm seeing Royal Enfield do as a company really makes me feel like they have just this deep passion for riding and all of the stuff that comes with it, because at the end of the day, a lot of companies, they happen to make motorcycles. Motorcycles are a byproduct of the rest of what they do. Like, think about Kawasaki. Kawasaki Heavy Industries. That's not a motorcycle brand. They just happen to make motorcycles. They make a bunch of industrial shipping equipment and agricultural stuff. Motorcycles are a rounding error on their books. Same deal with Suzuki. Suzuki sells cars in India, little cars in India and Asia, and that's where they make the bulk of their cash. It's part of the reason why they're pulling out of MotoGP. But Royal Enfield, for better or for worse, they just make motorcycles, and they want to make them as fun as possible, and they do all of this cool stuff on their bikes. You know, the CEO has all the C-suite guys go ride motorcycles so they understand the product that they're selling. And that's really why I think it's important that Royal Enfield is doing what they're doing in the motorcycling industry, because more and more we're seeing companies be more risk averse. They don't want to take risks. They don't want to do weird and wacky stuff anymore. Look at Honda. Honda hasn't done a weird and wacky thing in decades, and yet these guys made oval piston V4s and the CB900F that had the, like, transfer case and the up high-low gearbox and all kinds of weird wonky stuff. They made the Rebel, or the Fury. They made the Rune. They made all these weird motorcycles, but they just don't do that anymore. Even Harley Davidson has lost their joie de vivre, in a sense. They're very, very risk averse. They're trying to do this new stuff, which I wholeheartedly applaud. I'm all for stuff like the Pan America and the new Sportster line and stuff, but at the end of the day, their sales are really bolstered by the Milwaukee 8, which, okay, sure, it's a great motor, but it's been done to death. I need something new and something different that's going to reawaken that sort of passion for biking, and I think that Royal Enfield's got it. Now, if you were to ask me what I want to see from Royal Enfield, the main thing I want to see is I want to see them make some bikes that have more in them. They make great beginner bikes, but I'd like to see them take a stab at something more premium. I'd like to see them take a stab at a bike that makes, you know, 70 or 80 horsepower. I'd like to see them build a 650 version of the Himalayan. I'd like to see them do more than just make these little beginner bikes, because at the end of the day, beginner bikes are great and they sell really well across the world, but give us something more. Give us something that's going to energize everybody. I think that's why here in the States, the Interceptor and Conti do so well, because they're bigger motorcycles that have a little bit of buildable quality to them. And why sometimes you see people looking away from this bike. And I'd love to see Royal Enfield take a stab at building something that's maybe for the American market. At the end of the day, I think I see Royal Enfield as being who Harley Davidson was back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. These were the bikes of the people, where you go and you get your bike and you chop it up and you turn it into your own thing. And that makes me super excited. And I think that Royal Enfield's success, if they want to push it, can invigorate other brands. And I really want to see what Royal Enfield can do. I want to see what they can do when they push the envelope, because right now they've been playing it safe. But they're risky. They seem like they're willing to take some risks. Take a risk. Make something different. Make something that is surprising. Surprise us. Because I think they can do a really good job. So folks, that was just a little bit of a soapbox moment as to why I actually genuinely like Royal Enfield. And I hope it helps y'all understand why I think about them the way that I do, because they're a cool brand, and I like to see what everybody's doing, because, you know, when people are competing, that's when we get some cool stuff. Let me know your all's thoughts on Royal Enfield down below, and until the next one, I'll catch you guys later.